Meow, meow. Ba-da-bow. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Alright. Okay, that's let's see. What additional ones can I put on there? Mod action. Oh, this is the history mod actions. I see. All right. We're getting there. Sitting the app for a few minutes. Let people stream on in. For the people who are watching the VOD or are over on YouTube, there's music in the background, and you're just gonna have to imagine the music there as I bebop my way through things here. Yeah. My precious. See, that just sounds like I'm trying to do okay, we can hold on. I can kill the music here. My precious. Yes. See, I know it from Ren and Stimpy, but I know it was based on an actor. But my precious Stimpy, what are you doing? What a weird flipping cartoon. Figure well. Huh? Oops. Oopsie days. Nope. Not you. Hey, what? Hold on, 1 sec. I mucked it up. There we go. How the heck Ren and Stimpy managed to make its way on air? I have no flipping clue, but you know, whatever. Who am I to judge? The voice acting was pretty good. I loved the voice acting. Anyway, I hope everyone's doing well today. Was a heck of a day with a lot of work. But we are here now to read from a book that rhymed, which was entirely my intention. And I will swear to that. Up and down. I'll certainly swear up and down. Okie dokie. I don't know how many more people are planning on showing up to this. But these streams are somewhat special to me. So, you know, we do these streams because the point of this channel is to enjoy ourselves. And so that's what we're going to do. Yep. Okay. I should start reading before my voice cuts out. um, so before we get going, right, we are starting chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire. Of course, Bilbo has just escaped from Golem after the riddles in the dark and stealing the ring. The in no way special ring that has nothing to do with the fate of the world in future books. um, the ring that allows him to go invisible. But yes. So, all right, let's go. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he did not know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on till the sun began to sink westwards behind the mountains. Their shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward, and he could see before him only ridges and slopes, falling towards lowlands and plains, glimpsed occasionally between the trees. Good heavens, he exclaimed. I seem to have got right to the other side of the Misty Mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where can Gandalf and the dwarves have gotten to? I only hope to goodness they're not back there in the power of the goblins. He wandered on, out of the little high valley, over its edge, and down the slopes beyond, but all the while, a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now that he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty and he must turn back. Very miserable he felt about it, when he heard voices. He stopped and listened. Did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding downwards with a rocky wall on the left hand. On the other side, the ground sloped away, and there were dwells below the levels of the path, overhung with bushes and low trees. In one of these dwells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept still nearer, and suddenly he saw, peering between two big boulders, a head with a red hood on. It was Balin doing lookout. Oh, hold on one second. I nearly forgot to do something. Uh, sorry. We'll go back to this in a second. I just needed to do that, and I needed to do this to make sure that we don't have feedback. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. There we go. It was Balin doing lookout. He could have clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He still had got the ring on for fear of meeting something unexpected and unpleasant, and he saw that Balin was looking straight at him without noticing him. I will give them a surprise, he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dwell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that had happened to them in the tunnels and wondering and debating what they would do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on their journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hands of the goblins without trying to find out if he was alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. After all, he is my friend, said the wizard, and not a bad chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you hadn't lost him. The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and had to come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone with more sense. He has been more trouble than you so far, said one. If we have to go back now to those abominable tunnels and look for him, then drat him, I say. Gandalf answered angrily. I brought him, and I don't bring things that are of no use. Either you help me look for him, or I will go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can for yourselves. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before this is over. What do you want to do? Whatever did you want to go and drop him for, Dory? You would have dropped him, said Dory, if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs from behind in the dark and tripped your feet and kicked you in the back. Why didn't you pick him up again? Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and fighting in the dark, everyone falling over, bodies hitting one another. You nearly chopped my head off with Glamdring, and Thorn was stabbing here, there, and everywhere with Orcrist. All of a sudden, you gave one of your blinding flashes. We saw the goblins running back yelping, and you shouted, 'Follow me, everybody!' And everybody ought to have followed. We thought everybody had. There was no time to count, as you know quite well, till we had dashed through the gate, guards out to the lower door and helter-skelter down here. And here we are, without the burglar. Confiscate him." "And here's the burglar," said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them and slipping off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped. Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was as astonished as any of them, but probably more pleased than all the others. He called to Balin and told him that he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. It is a fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he chuckled inside and said nothing whatsoever about the ring. When they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, I just crept along, very carefully and quietly." "Well, it's the first time even a mouse has crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted," said Balin. "And I take my hood off to you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about the adventures after they lost him, and he sat down and told them everything, except about the finding of the ring. Not just now, he thought. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition and shuddered most appreciatively at his description of Gollum. And then I couldn't think of any question with him sitting beside me," ended Bilbo, "so all I said was, 'What's in my pocket?' And he couldn't guess in 3 guesses, so I said, 'What about your promise? Show me the way out.' But he came at me to kill me, and I ran and fell over, and then he missed me in the dark, and I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, so he was making for it. And he sat down at the entrance, and I could not get by, so I jumped over him and escaped and ran to the gate." "What about the guards?" they asked. "Weren't there any?" "Well, yes, lots of, but I dodged them. I got stuck in the door, which was only open a crack, and I lost a lot of buttons," he said sadly, looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and here I am." The dwarves looked at him with quite new respect, and when he talked about dodging guards and jumping over Gollum and squeezing through as if it was not very difficult or alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. "Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess." And he gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows as he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed at the part of the tale that he had left out. Then he had questions of his own to ask, for if Gandalf had explained it all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again and where they had all got to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once, so now he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of the evil goblins in that part of the mountain, but their main gate used to come out on a different pass, one more easily traveled by, so they often caught people benighted near the gates. Evidently, the people must have given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened a new entrance to the top of the pass the dwarves had taken quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up till now. "I must see if I can't find a more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all." As soon as Gandalf had heard Bilbo's yell, he realized what had happened. In the flash, he killed the goblins that were grabbing him and nipped inside the crack just as it snapped to. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to the edge of the great hall, and there he sat down and worked up the best magic he could in the shadows. "A very ticklish business it was," he said, "touch and go." But of course, Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and lights. Even the Hobbit had never forgotten the magic fireworks at Old Took's Midsummer Eve, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his buttons. As a matter of fact, it was well known to anybody who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took the wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide them in the right direction. They made that gate ages ago, said he, partly as a way of escape if they needed one, partly a way out to lands beyond where they come in the dark and do great damage. They guard it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it doubly after this, he laughed. All the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped, so it might be said that they've had the best of it so far. But the wizard called them to their senses. We must best be getting on at once now that we have a little rested, he said. They will be out after us in hundreds when the night comes on, and already the shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dark. There will be a bit of moon, which, if it keeps fine, and that's lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by. Oh, yes, said he in answer to more questions from the hobbit. You lose track of time inside the goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday. It was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We've gone miles and miles and come right out through the heart of the mountains. We are now on the other side, quite a shortcut. But we are not to the point which our pass would have brought us. We're too far off to the north and have some awkward country up ahead. And we're still pretty high up. Let's get on. I'm dreadfully hungry, groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Since the night before last. Just think of that for a hobbit. His stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly, now that the excitement was over. Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you would like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage. No, thank you, said Bilbo. Very well, then we must tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves. As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat. But the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled on a bit of sorrel and drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path and ate 3 wild strawberries they found on its bank. It was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared, the bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram and the yellow rockseas all vanished, and they found themselves on the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went scattering down and started other pieces down below them, slithering and rolling. Then clumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with the dust and noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below them seemed to move, and they were sliding away, huddled together in fearful confusion of slipping and rattling and cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of the climbing wood of pines, and here stood right up to the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forest of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into the lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree to take shelter from the onslaught of rock. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. Well, that has got us on a bit, said Gandalf. And even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly. I dare say, grumbled Bombur. But they won't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down on our heads. The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. Nonsense. We're going to turn aside here of our path of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light. The sun had long gone behind the mountains, and already the shadows were deepening around them. Although far away through the trees and over the black tops of those glowering lower down, they could still see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able down the gentle slope of pine forest and the slanting path towards leading steady southwards. At times, they were pushing through a sea of bracken with tall fronds rising right above the hobbit's head. At times, they were marching along, uh, quiet as quiet over a floor of pine needles, and all the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the trees. "Must we go any further?" asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that they could only just see Thorin's weird beard wagging beside him, and so quiet that he could hear the dwarves breathing like a loud noise. "My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack." "A bit further," said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them uh, as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden, they heard a howl way down the hill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another way to the right and a good deal nearer to them, and then another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins' hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him often enough in tales. One of his elder cousins on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild, on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see you to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he said. And it became a proverb, although we now say "out of the frying pan and into the fire" in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. "Up the trees, quick!" cried Gandalf, and they ran for the trees at the edge of the glade, uh, hunting for the ones that had branches fairly low or were slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as ever they could, you can guess, and up they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarves sitting in the tree with their beards dangling down like old gentlemen's, gone cracked and playing at being boys. Fili and Kili were at the top of a tall larch, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were more comfortable in a huge pine with regular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel, before Bofor, Bombor, and Thorin were in another. Dwalin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir with few branches, and were trying to find a place to sit in the greenery in the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a good deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the very edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo? He could not get into any tree, was scuttling about from trunk to trunk like a rabbit who has lost his hole and has a dog after it. "You've left a burglar behind again," said Nori to Dori, looking down. "I can't always be carrying burglars on my back," said Doran. "Down tunnels and up trees? What do you think I am, a porter?" "He'll be eaten if we don't do something," said Thorin, for the howls were all around them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dori," he called, for Dori was the lowest down and the easiest tree. "Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up." Dori really was a decent fellow, in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand down, even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far as he could. So Dori actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. Just at that moment, the wolves trotted howling into the clearing. All of a sudden, there were hundreds of eyes looking at them. Still, Dori did not let Bilbo down. He waited until he had clambered off his shoulders onto the branches, and then he jumped for the branches himself, only just in time. Wolf snapped at his cloak as he swung up and nearly got him. In a minute, there was a whole pack of them yelping around the tree and leaping up at the trunk with eyes blazing and tongues hanging out. But even the wild wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild are named, cannot climb trees. For a time, they were safe. Luckily, it was warm and not windy. The trees are not very comfortable to sit in for any time, but in the cold and the wind, with wolves around, waiting for you, they can be perfectly miserable places. This glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place of the wolves. More and more kept coming in. They left guards at the foot of the tree, which Dory and Bilbo were, and then sent about snuffling until they had smelt out every tree that had anyone in it. These they guarded too, whilst the rest, hundreds and hundreds it seemed, went and sat in a great circle in the glade. In the middle of the circle was a great grey wolf. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Gandalf understood it. Bilbo did not, and it sounded terrible to him, all their talk was, as if all their talk was about cruel and wicked things, as it was. Every now and then, all the wargs in the circle would answer the Grey Chief altogether, and their dreadful clamor almost made the hobbit fall out of his pine tree. I will tell you what Gandalf heard, although Bilbo did not understand it. The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. The goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes or are marching to war, which I'm glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days, they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they often got the wargs to help them and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on the wolves like men do on horses. Now it seemed that a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were still probably hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live amongst the more pleasant woods and in the valleys along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dared not attack them if there were many together or in the bright day. But now they had planned, with the goblins' help, to come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If the plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there the next day. All would have been killed except for the few the goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. This was dreadful talk to listen to, not only because of the brave woodsmen and their wives and children, but also because of the danger which now threatened Gandalf and his friends. The wargs were angry and puzzled at finding them here in their very meeting place. They thought they were friends of the woodsmen and had come to spy on them and would take news of their plans into the valleys, and then the goblins and the wolves would have to fight a terrible battle instead of capturing prisoners and devouring people waked suddenly in their sleep. So the wargs had no intention of going away and letting the people up in the trees escape, at any rate not until morning. Long before that, they said the goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains, and the goblins can climb trees or cut them down. Now you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, to feel that they were in a very bad place and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have their own way, although he could not do very much stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all around the ground below. He gathered the pine cones from the branches of the tree, which he set alight with bright blue fire, and threw it whizzing down among the circle of wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. They burst on the ground in the middle of the circle and went off in colored sparks and smoke. A especially large one hit the chief wolf in the nose, and he leaped into the air 10 feet, then rushed round and round in a circle, biting and snapping even at other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got on their coat, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled very quickly, they were soon all in flames. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their back, while those that were burning were running around, howling and setting others alight till their own friends chased them away, and they fled off down the slopes, crying and yammering and looking for water. "What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on the top of a lonely pinnace of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. "I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins at mischief in the woods?" He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leapt up and followed him. They circled up in the sky and looked down below at the ring of wargs, a tiny spot far below. But eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at great distance. The Lord of Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he did not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves and see the tiny flashes of fire and hear the yowling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see the glint of the moon on the goblin spears and helmets as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillside from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel, but the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them when they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, as they do not eat such creatures. They swooped on them and drove them shrieking back into their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. The goblins hated the eagles and feared them, but could not reach their lofty seats or drive them from the mountains. Tonight, the Lord of Eagles was filled with curiosity to know what was afoot, and so he summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains, and slowly circling ever round and round, came down, 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 towards the ring of wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. Very good thing, too. Dreadful things had been going on down there. The wolves had caught fire and fled into the forest and set it alight in several places. It was high summer in the eastern side of the mountain. There had been little rain for some time. Yellow bracken, fallen branches, deep piled pine needles, and here and there dead trees were soon in flames. All around the clearing, the warg's fire was leaping, but the wolf guards did not leave the trees. Maddened and angry, they were leaping and howling around the trunks and cursing the dwarves in their horrible language, with their tongues hanging out and their eyes shining red and fierce as flames. Then suddenly the goblins came running up, yelling. They thought a battle with the woodsmen was going on, but they soon learned what had really happened, and some of them actually sat down and laughed. Others waved spears and clashed the shafts against their shields. Goblins are not afraid of fire, and soon had a plan which seemed to them most amusing. Some got all the wolves together in a pack. Some stacked fern and brushwood around the tree trunks. Others rushed around and stamped and beat and stamped until nearly all the flames were put out. But they did not put out the fire nearest to the trees where the dwarves were. That fire they fed with leaves and dead branches and bracken. Soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all around the dwarves, a ring which they kept from spreading outwards, but slowly closed in, till the running fire was licking at the fuel piled under the trees. Smoke was in Bilbo's eyes, and he could feel the heat of the flames. And through the reek, he could see the goblins dancing round and round in a circle like people around a midsummer bonfire. Outside the ring of dancing warriors with spears and axes stood the wolves at a respectful distance, watching and waiting. He could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. All right, song time. 15 birds in 5 fir trees. Their feathers are fanned in a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with these funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot? Fry them, boil them, eat them hot? Then they stopped and shouted, "Fly away, little birds, fly if you can. Come down, little birds, or you will get roasted in your nest. Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing?" "Go away, little boys," shouted Gandalf in answer. "This isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished." He said it to make them angry and to show them he was not frightened by them, though of course he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice and went on singing. "Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch to light the night for our delight. Yea, hey! Bake and toast 'em, fry and roast 'em till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skin crack, fat melts and bones black and cinders lie beneath the sky. So the dwarf shall die and light the night for our delight. Yea, hey, hooray, yahoy!" And with that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment it spread to the others. The bark caught fire, the lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree, this sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high, right amongst the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he probably would have killed a great many of them. But as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt, but he never leapt. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and was gone. There was a howl of anger and surprise from the goblins. Loud cried the Lord of the Eagles, to whom Gandalf had now spoken. Back swept the great birds that were with him, and down they came on like huge black shadows. The wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth. The goblins yelled and stamped with rage and flung their heavy spears in the air in vain. Over them swooped the eagles. The dark rush of their beating wings smote them to the floor, drove them far away. Their talons tore at goblin faces. Other birds flew to the treetops and seized the dwarves who were scrambling up now as far as they ever dared to go. Poor little Bilbo was very nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs as Dory was borne off last of all. And they went together above the tumult and the burning, Bilbo swaying in the air, his arms nearly breaking. Now far below, the goblins and the wolves were scattering far and wide in the woods. A few eagles were still circling and swooping above the battleground. The flames about the trees sprang up suddenly above the highest branches. Then they went up in a crackling fire. There was a sudden flurry of sparks and smoke. Bilbo had escaped only just in time. Soon the light of the burning was faint below, a red twinkle on the black floor, and they were high up in the sky, rising all the time in a strong, sweeping circles. Bilbo never forgot that flight. Clinging to Dory's ankle, he moaned, my arms, but Dory groaned, my poor legs, my poor legs. At the best times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn quite queer if he looked over the edge of quite a small little cliff, and he had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down beneath his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with light of the moon on a hillside rock or stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of the black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick. The flight ended only just in time for him. Just before his arms gave way, he loosened Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell into the rough platform of the Eagle's Eyrie. There he lay, without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at having been saved from the fire and fear lest he fall off that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side. He was feeling very queer indeed in his head by the time after the dreadful adventures of the last 3 days, with next to nothing to eat. He found himself saying aloud, now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it is suddenly picked out of the pan in a fork and put back on the shelf. You do not, he heard Dory answering, because the bacon knows that it will be going back into the pan sooner or later, and it is to be hoped that we shan't. Also, eagles aren't forks. Oh no, not a bit like forks, I mean, said Bilbo, sitting up and looking anxiously at the eagle, who was perched close by. He wondered what other nonsense he had been saying, and if the eagle would think it rude. You ought not to be rude to an eagle when you're only the size of a hobbit up in its area at night. The eagle only sharpened its beak on a stone and trimmed its feathers and took no notice. Soon another eagle flew up. The Lord of the Eagles bid you to bring the prisoners to the great shelf, he cried, and was off again. The other seized Dory in his claws and flew away with him into the night, leaving Bilbo all alone. He had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners, and to begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit when his own turn came. The eagle came back and seized him in his talons by the back of the coat and swooped off. This time he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock on the mountainside. There was no path down on it, save by flying, and no path off it except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall. The Lord of the Eagles was there, and he was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed to Bilbo that Bilbo was not going to get eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly and even be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered service to the Eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, not captives of the Eagle. As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing the plans with the Great Eagle for carrying the dwarfs and himself and Bilbo as far away and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below. Ooh, picture. The misty mountains looking west from the Eyrie towards the Goblin Gate. Of course, these were all drawn by J.R.R. Tolkien. He drew a bunch of them. Anyway, the Lord of the Eagles would not take them anywhere near where the men lived. They would shoot at us with their great bows of yew, he said, for they think we are after their sheep. And at other times they would be right. No, we are glad to cheat the goblins of their sport and glad to repay our thanks to you, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves on the southward plains. Very well, said Gandalf. Take us as far as you will. We are already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime we are famished with hunger. I'm nearly dead of it, said Bilbo in a weak little voice that nobody heard. That can perhaps be mended, said the Lord of the Eagles. Later on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of the rock and the figure of the dwarves around it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The Eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to have it delivered by butcher, all ready to cook. Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going. Since Oin and Gloin had lost their tinder boxes, the dwarves had never taken to matches even yet. Dwarves have never taken to matches even yet. So ended the adventure of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he could sleep contentedly, although he would have liked a loaf of butter better than bits of meat roasted on sticks. He slept curled on the hard rock more soundly than he ever had in his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all the different rooms looking for something that he could not find nor remember what it looked like. I believe that's the end of the chapter. Yes. Chapter 7, Queer Lodgings. Where are we at? Okay. That was a long chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see. So chapter 7 goes until 188. Chapter. Where are we? So from 153 to 188. Okay. 35 pages. Oh, man. What do you think? Should we do another one? Oh, we can certainly do another chapter if you would like. Do this isn't sounding that bad, huh? Uh, well, yeah, this one's another kind of longish chapter, so maybe we'll just leave it here for tonight, if that's okay with you. So we'll continue the cadence of every other week. We'll keep going, and we'll make our way through. Plenty of time. No rush on this. Yeah. More to come, but looking at potentially having a game day with several other streamers, so we might have a little fun together. But that is still in the maybe works. So I will let you know as we come up. Let's see. We will be keeping to the schedule this week. Starting next week, I might also move Thursday's stream to the evening. Hey, Mark, how's it going? I was just thinking of shutting down a little, but if you want to stick around, we can keep going. Anyway, I was just saying. Okay, sounds good. I was just saying, starting next week, and I'll have it out in the next schedule. I think I'm going to move Thursday also to the evening. Yeah, probably the same time as this one, 5:15 Eastern. Just so that I got a lot of work stuff to get done in the morning, and so in the evenings I can't think about work. My brain just doesn't work. I can get up at 4 in the morning and do work. By 7 p.m. or by 5 p.m., honestly, my brain's like, nope. You don't know how to solve problems. So on Thursdays, rather than taking up my work time, I might move the stream till the evening. Oh, but that means I'll have to skip out on trivia. Wife and I usually do a trivia Thursday evenings, but at least until I'm done with this little project right now, where everything has to be done and real fast, I might go ahead and who's a whatsy brain. Sorry, I might do an evening stream. You know what? Let's do this. I kind of want to keep going. I just don't know that I want to keep going for another 35 pages for the next chapter. So instead, let's look up a short story. What short story should we find? What short story indeed? Yeah, I think they're just a little something different. Let's see, classic short stories. If you have any preferences, please feel free to drop in, or poems. Just something that's kind of like in the in-between length there. Short story by title. Let's see. No. The lottery. No. Monkey's paw. There's always to build a fire. That's a nice depressing one. Let's see. 100 great short stories. Let's see. Oh, Henry. Ooh, let's see what we can find by Ambrose Bierce. Bitter Bierce. He wrote a lot of like creepy stories. And then actually vanished without a trace in Mexico when he was trying to go fight for or against Pancho Villa. I forget exactly, but which is entirely suitable. He was a journalist actually during the American Civil War and had definite PTSD. That's a damn thing. There's the boarded window. Let's do the boarded window. It's nice and short. Let's move over to here. And we can do like here. How's that look? I'm actually going to zoom in a bunch. I can read it better because yeah. Give me 1 second. Let me just fix this so that it is not tiny like this. Jump. And sorry. In case you're wondering, yes, the sound effects are absolutely necessary. There we go. The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce. In 1830, only a few miles away from what is now the great city of Cincinnati, lay an immense and almost unbroken forest. The whole region was sparsely settled by people of the frontier, restless souls who no sooner had hewn down a fairly habitable homes out of the wilderness and attained to that degree of prosperity which today we would call indigence. Then, impelled by some mysterious force of their nature, they abandoned all that and pushed further westwards to encounter new perils and privations in the effort to regain the meager comforts which they voluntarily renounced. Many of them had already forsaken that region for remoter settlements, but among those remaining was one who had been of the first arriving. He lived alone in a house of logs, surrounded on all sides by the great forest, of whose gloom and silence he seemed a part, for no one had known him to smile or speak a needless word. His simple wants were supplied by the sale or barter of wild animals in the river town, for not a thing did he grow upon the land which, if needful, he might have claimed right of undisturbed possession. There were evidences of improvement. A few acres of ground immediately about the house had once been cleared of its trees, the decaying stumps of which were half concealed by new growth that had been suffered to repair the ravage wrought by the axe. Apparently, the man's zeal for agriculture had burned with a failing flame, expiring in pentennial ashes. The little log house with its chimney of sticks, its roof of warping clapboards, weighted with traversing poles, and its chinking of clay had a single door and directly opposite a window. The latter, however, was boarded up, and nobody could remember a time when it was not, and no one knew why it was so closed. Certainly not because of the occupants' dislike of the light and air, for on the rare occasions when a hunter had passed the lonely spot, the recluse had commonly been seen sunning himself on the doorstep, if heaven had provided sunshine for his need. I fancy there are few persons living today who knew the secret of that window, but I am one, as you shall see. This man's name was Murlock. He was apparently 70 years old, actually about 50. Something besides years had a hand in his aging. His hair was long, his full beard white, his gray, lusterless eyes sunken, his face singularly seamed with wrinkles which appeared to belong to two intersecting systems. In feature, he was tall and spare, with the stoop in the shoulders, a burden bearer. I never saw him. These particulars I learned from my grandfather, from whom I got most of the man's story when I was a lad. He was known to him when living nearby in that early day. One day, Murdoch was found in his cabin, dead. It was not a time or a place for coroners and newspapers, and I suppose it was agreed that he had died of natural causes, or I should have been told and should remember. I know only that with what was probably a sense of the fitness of things, the body was buried near the cabin alongside the grave of his wife, who had preceded him by so many years that local tradition had retained hardly a hint of her existence. That closes the final chapter of the true story, excepting indeed the circumstance that many years afterwards, in company with an equally intrepid spirit, I penetrated into the place and ventured near enough to the ruined cabin to throw a stone against it, and ran away to avoid the ghost which every well-informed boy thereabout knew haunted the spot. But there is an earlier chapter, that supplied by my grandfather. When Murlock built his cabin and began laying sturdily about it with his axe to hew out a farm, meanwhile, his means of support, uh, he was young and strong and full of hope. In that eastern country whence he came, he had married, and, as was the fashion, a young woman in all ways worthy of his honest devotion, who shared the dangers and privations of his lot with willing spirit and light heart. There is no known record of her name, of her charms of mind or person. Tradition is silent, and the doubter is at liberty to entertain his doubt. But God forbid that I should share it. Of their affection and happiness there is abundant assurance in every added day of the man's widowed life. For what but the magnetism of a blessed memory could have chained that venturesome spirit to his lot like that? One day Murlock returned from gunning in a distant part of the forest to find his wife prostrate with fever and delirious. There was no physician within miles, no neighbor, nor was she in a condition to be left to summon help. He set about the task of nursing her back to health, but at the end of the third day, she fell into unconsciousness and so passed away, apparently with never a gleam of returning reason. From what we know of a nature like his, we may venture to sketch in some of the details of the outline picture drawn by my grandfather. When convinced she was dead, Murlock had a sense enough to remember that the dead must be prepared for burial. In performance of this sacred duty, he blundered now and again, did certain things incorrectly, and others he did correctly. Others which he did correctly were done over and over. His occasional failures to accomplish some simple and ordinary act filled him with astonishment, like that of a drunken man who wonders at the suspension of familiar natural laws. He was surprised, too, that he did not weep, surprised and a little ashamed. Surely it was unkind not to weep for the dead. Tomorrow, he said aloud, I shall have to make the coffin, Arid dig the grave, and I shall miss her when she is no longer in sight. But now she is dead, of course. But it's all right. It must be all right somehow. Things cannot be so bad as they seem. He stood over the body in the fading light, adjusting the hair and putting the finishing touches on the simple toilet, doing all mechanically with soulless care. And still, through his consciousness ran an undersense of conviction that all was right, that he should have her again as before, and everything explained. He had no experience in grief. His capacity had not been enlarged by use. His heart could not contain it at all, nor his imagination rightly conceive it. He did not know he was so hard struck that knowledge would come later and never go. Grief is an artist of powers as various as the instruments upon which it plays his dirges for the dead, evoking in some the sharpest, shrillest notes, from others low, grave chords that throb, recurrent like slow beating of a distant drum. Some natures it startles, some it stupefies. To one, it comes with a stroke of an arrow, stinging all the sensibilities of a keener life. To another, as a blow of a bludgeon, which in crushing benumbs. Hold on one second. Yes. Very good. I got pizza delivered to me. B has to leave for her volunteer at like kids robot league that she helps out at. And so she made pizza, decided she didn't want it, and so she brought it up to me. So I got pizza. So once we're done with this, yeah. Once we're done with the depressing story, we'll go on to pizza. It'll be great. We may conceive Murlock to have been affected in that way, and and here we are on surer ground than that of conjecture. No sooner had he finished his pious work than, sinking into the chair by the side of his table upon which the body lay, and noting how white the profile showed in the deepening gloom, he laid his arms upon the table's edge and dropped his face into them, tearless yet and unutterably weary. At that moment came in through the open window a long wailing sound like the cry of a lost child in the far deeps of the waking woods. But the man did not move. Again, and nearer it sounded, sounding that unearthly cry upon his failing sense. Perhaps it was a wild beast. Perhaps it was a dream, for Murlock was asleep. Some hours later, as it appeared, this unfaithful watcher woke, and lifting his head from his arms, intently listened. He knew not why. There in the black darkness by the side of the dead, recalling all without a shock, he strained his eyes to see he knew not what. His senses were all alert, his breath suspended, his blood had stilled its tides as if to assist the silence. What had waked him, and where was it? Suddenly the table shook beneath his arms, and at that moment he heard, or fancied he heard, a light, soft step, another sounds his bare feet upon the floor. He was terrified beyond power to cry out or move. Perforce he waited there in the darkness, those seeming centuries of such dread as one may know, yet live to tell. He tried vainly to speak the dead woman's name, vainly to stretch forth his hand across the table to learn if she were there. His throat was powerless, his arms and hands were like lead. Then occurred something most frightful. Some heavy body seemed hurled against the table with impetus that pushed it against his breast so sharply it nearly overthrew him. And at the same instant he heard and felt the fall of something upon the floor with so violent a thump that the whole house was shaken by the impact. A scuffling ensued, a confusion of sound impossible to describe. Murloc had risen to his feet. Fear had by excess forfeited control of his faculties. He hung his hands upon the table. He flung his hands upon the table. Nothing was there. There is a point at which terror may turn to madness, and madness incites action. With no definite intent, from no motive but the wayward impulse of a madman, Murloc sprang to the wall with a little groping, seized the loaded rifle, and without aim discharged it. By the flash which lit up the room with a vivid illumination, he saw an enormous panther dragging the dead woman towards the window, its teeth fixed in her throat. Then there was darkness blacker than before, and silence. When he returned to consciousness, the sun was high and the wood was vocal with large birds. The body lay near the window, and where the breast had been left when it was when frightened away by the flash and report of the rifle, the clothing was deranged, the long hair in disorder, the limbs lay anyhow. From the throat, dreadfully lacerated, had issued a pool of blood not yet entirely coagulated. The ribbon which he had bound the wrists was broken, the hands tightly clenched. Beneath the teeth was a fragment of the animal's ear. Ah, good old Bierce. It's a nice story. The woman saves her husband. She bites the animal's ear. That's why the window is boarded up. Anyway. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to do this story. I forgot. It's a little hard to read Bierce off the top of my head if I'm not. Yeah, it's a little fierce. It goes a little hard. Bierce tended to do that. So, as I stated, I am not by any very long stretch of imagination someone who reads professionally or does voice acting or anything like that. My goal is to get better at it just by practicing. And so I'm trying to practice a whole bunch of things and just kind of enjoy myself. So pretty much every other week on Tuesdays, I do some reading. We've been reading through The Hobbit, obviously, and we're about maybe halfway, a little under halfway done with The Hobbit. So next week is going to be probably a game night, and then the week after we'll continue The Hobbit. So feel free to join for any of those. I will throw up a new schedule for next week as we get closer, and I'll put it up on my Discord. I'll put it up on Toasty's Discord. I'll put it up on Runyour's Discord, so you can catch it wherever. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I need to get better at it. I often stutter reading it, and so that's what I have to, like, I'll lose my place a little and miss a word or something. Anyway, I'll get better as I get more practiced, but you know, that's kind of the goal. This is to have fun and practice these things. So, at any rate, next stream will be Thursday. We're still going to go with Thursday morning next week. That's going to change to Thursday evenings. Thursday stream is our research stream. So we will be diving into some Feynman path integrals. That is the plan for Thursday. I'm also going to try if you have a specific paper that you would like for our upcoming Sunday morning papers, the videos were actually a great success. So I don't mind doing something like that again. A lot of people were very engaged by it and seemed to like that quite a bit. So we could do other science videos and kind of discuss it as we go through, or we could continue to go back to a real paper, or possibly a mix of the two if we find like a nice short paper. We could do an engineering one. Those tend to be a little shorter. We could even do like an antenna design paper. That'd be fun. We can find them. There are some pretty small antenna design papers. They're pretty easy to get through. So we can do that. And maybe find a video. Maybe we could do one of the PBS Spacetime videos. I don't know. We'll have to find something. At any rate, thank you so much for joining today. Yeah, in 2 weeks we will do more reading. And otherwise I will be here on Thursday. I remembered that rating is a thing, so give me a second. Let me see if I could find someone to raid that is doing something in Toasty's playing. Toasty is one of the crew of streamers that we sort of sit and chat with. So I will raid Toasty. She is currently playing Repo. I'm not sure with whom, but anyway, so let's see if I can remember how to do this raid thing. I think it's exclamation point raid. No, not exclamation point. Oh, I need to do it on here. That's why. Raid? Or is it slash raid? There we go. Slash raid. Aha. Is Toast? STY. Let's see. I'm very glad you liked it. Yeah. I the goal is just to have fun. By the way, if there's any other short stories that you would like to read when we do the reading thing, feel free to shoot me a message on it. All right. I think I can figure out how to do this silly old raid thing. So we're going to raid Toasty. Feel free to say hello. I think this should work. The raid has been created. Well, yes. So Toasty is a good friend and a good streamer. So, away we shall go. Did it work? Oh my god, it worked.
If you had all four, you can get
Stumble.
power.
Rating with 4? Thank you.
Yes.
Dude.
Here.
Look, I hope you're streaming it well.
All the chaos in my ear.
Hi.
Cheetah! Let's make some burgers. I'm hungry. Let's go.
I was just rated.
Kitty cat.
Oh snap! Welcome in, Raiders. Let's go. Good shit.
Alright, I hopefully am in now. Maybe.